ones. In the beginning, we had a lot more time to spend at home, and in the first few days, I was rearrange my apartment, move everything, change everything, put in the aquarium some water and some fishes and everything to create a good mood to stay at home, because now we are spending a lot more time at home. And then came the first weekend that we cannot go out anywhere. And I thought to myself, what I will do with all this free time in the weekend? And I remember that several years ago, I created a pure CSS game, which is called Kill the Birds, that so many web developers all around the world loved it so much. And I thought to myself that in the last several years, I learned so many new tricks in CSS that now I can create a lot better one. But I needed an idea of what it will be about. And it was one of the most easiest ideas that I have in my life. Because if we are now living in the coronavirus pandemic time, why not to create the coronavirus game? And this is exactly what I've done. I created this pure CSS game, which is called the Coronavirus Invaders. And everything that you are seeing right now is built only while using CSS and HTML. Yes, for the CSS part, I'm using CSS preprocessor. And for even the HTML part, I'm using an HTML preprocessor. But all the logic of this game, like when I'm clicking the I button and it's opening a pop-up, the logic and of the opening and the closing of the pop-up is done only while using CSS and HTML. And when I will click the Save the World button, the play button of the game, it will hide the game navigation and it will open the game frame itself. Even that logic is done only while using CSS and HTML. And when I will click on coronavirus creature, they will disappear and the score of the game will go up. Even that logic is done only while using CSS and HTML. And what about the countdown? No, really, the countdown is built only while using CSS. But before you're writing any single line of code in your own project, you need to think about something that inspires you. And I don't know why I remember an old code pen that I saw in the middle of the year of 2019 with these cute creatures that was remind me a little bit the coronavirus creature. And I needed to think about a name for the game and how to design the main navigation. And I don't know why I remember the old Chicken Invaders game. And I took the Invaders word and some other design ideas on how to design the main navigation. And the first thing that I wanted to create in my own game is to create the coronavirus creature. And it's nice to see that this was my inspiration, but in the end, the coronavirus creature will looking more different, and I love it because this is more my coronavirus creature. And then I started to create the HTML of every one of those coronavirus creature. And for me, the HTML is very important. It's not that you take HTML element and to throw them to an HTML document. No. This is an object of HTML coronavirus creature, and it needs to be very precise. Then I created this label HTML element with a class of coronavirus, and inside I put an input type radio. And you may ask, why I'm using here label HTML element, and why there is input type radio inside? This is part of the logic of the game that we will talk about it a little bit later. But all the visual parts of the coronavirus creature that you're seeing here are starting with its body. We have the body, and we have it inside the 12 hairs and his both eyes. But from the beginning, I saw that I have a lot of repetition in my HTML code, like to create those 12 span hair HTML elements. And in the real game, I have 100 coronavirus creatures. And I didn't want to copy paste them one by one. And I needed to think about a way to solve this problem. And in my first time in my life, I'm using here an HTML preprocessor with the name of Pug that give you the possibility to do the repetition in the HTML part in a more smarter way. And yes, for the CSS part, I'm using the CSS preprocessor of SAS that I'm using, I think, in the last 10 years for every one of my projects. And now, instead of doing this repetition, for example, in the code, I can write it in Pug, use variable, while loop, and in this way, to do all the repetition in a more smarter way. Pug is being compiled to regular HTML, but as you can see, Pug is written very different from HTML. And if you are working with Pug, you cannot write half Pug and half HTML. If you are working in Pug, you need to write everything in Pug. And this means that I needed to update all the HTML code to the new way that Pug is being written. And yes, you need to get used to it. But all these projects I was doing in 2 days in the weekend, and I was learning Pug. Meanwhile, I was creating this project. Because of that, everyone can learn Pug. It's really not so hard. And now I wanted to start to paint the visual part of the coronavirus creature. I started with the body. I gave it position relative. Why position relative? Because all the inner parts need to be according to its body. The body got width and height of 100 pixel, background color black, and to get the circle shape, I just gave it border radius of 50%. To create all of the eyes and to select, if you remember, the both classes of I1 and I2 together combined, I'm using here the attribute selector with the star character. And I'm giving both of them width and height, background color white, and border radius of 50%. Because the width and the height are a little bit different, with the border radius, it's getting the egg shape that is nice to get. To locate them, I gave both of them position absolute from the top 25%, the first eye from the left 25%, the right eye from the right 25%, and a little bit rotate Z to the inside. To create the inner part of the eyes without adding another HTML element, I'm using the before pseudo element in every one of those eyes. I gave it width, height, background color, and border radius of 50%. And if you are looking, what I created until now is just circles, circles, and circles. To create the hairs of the coronavirus creature and to select all the classes, if you remember, between Air 1 until Air 12, again, I'm using here the attribute selector with the star character. And in every one of those hairs is created from two boxes that I'm creating with the before and the after pseudo element. The after pseudo element is the root of the hair that I'm putting in the bottom. The crown of the hair is the before pseudo element that I'm putting up above. And to get the circle shape, I'm just giving it border radius of 50%. To locate all those hair, first I give all of them position absolute and locate them in the middle, in the center of the coronavirus creature, exactly here. And now, one by one, with the transform property, I want to put them all around the coronavirus creature. How I'm doing it? The first hair, I'm giving a transform property with a rotate Z value of 0 degrees that doesn't do anything, and a translate Y value with a value of minus 65 pixels that taking the first hair from the center to the top. But the second hair need to go from the center, but top, but little bit to the right. How I'm doing it? Hair 2 will now get a transform property with a rotate Z value of 30 degrees, and only then the translate Y value with a value of minus 65 pixels. And in this way, the second hair will go to from the center to the top right. And if you didn't know until now, the order of the value in the transform property are very important because they are affecting each other. And in this way, I just located all those 12 hairs. As you can see here, different rotate Z value and the same translate Y value. But as you can see here, we have a lot of repetition in our code, and we as web developers don't love to create repetition. How can we do it in another way? Because I'm working with the CSS preprocessor of SAS, in SAS, we can create the SAS for loop. And this is exactly what I'm doing in my real project. First, I'm creating a SAS variable with the name of start position with a value of 0 degrees. Then I'm creating the SAS for loop that have inside another SAS variable with the name of I that is going dynamically between 1 to 12. In every one of the iterations, this creates me dynamically a CSS selector between Air 1 until Air 12. In every one of the iterations, the SAS variable of start position is getting bigger by 30 degrees, and I'm just putting the SAS variable inside the rotate Z value. And in this way, I just now created you the CSS. Nice, but I wanted this creature to feel a lot more alive, and I wanted to edit some animations. And the first animation that I wanted to add, I wanted to create that the hairs are getting moved. But the problem that I had, that every one of the animation have a different transform value. And this means that if I wanted to animate all those 12 hairs, I needed to create 12 different animations for every one of those hairs. And because I didn't want to copy paste them and to create them one by one, I just created them dynamically with the same SAS for loop. As you can see here, I'm creating 12 different animations. And in this way, I don't need to write them one by one. And every one of the hair have a different CSS animation. But I wanted this creature to feel a lot more alive, and I wanted to add an animation for the eyes, and I added 2 animations for the eyes. One for the inner part of the eyes that they will move a little bit, and I wanted to create the effect that the eyes are getting closed. How I'm doing it? I'm using the second pseudo element of every one of the eyes. the after pseudo element. And it has a width of 100%, height of 0 pixel, and background color black. And because it has a height of 0 pixel, you don't see it. But in the animation of it, that is taking 5 seconds, only in the last half second, it's getting a height of 100%. And in this way, the eyes are getting close. But enough talking about the Corona creature. Now let's talk about all the logic of the game. The basic things that you need to understand is how to separate all the frames that we have in our own game. And to do that, let's look again on the game itself. Let's open the game, and the first frame, as you can see here, is the game menu frame. And this is the first frame that we need to represent in our HTML document. The second one is when I will click on the How to Play button, it will open a pop-up, and yes, we can put frame above other frames. The same way, when I'm clicking the My button, it will open another pop-up. And this is the third frame that we need to represent. And the last frame that we need to represent is when I will click the Save the World button, it will hide the game menu navigation, and it will open the game frame itself. And this is our last 4th frame that we need to represent in our HTML document. How I'm representing all those frames? In a very easy way. I'm creating 4 separated section HTML elements. And as you can see by the class name and by the ID name, the first one is the game menu frame. The second one is the game frame itself. The third one is the pop-up of OM, and the last one is the pop-up of How to Play. But when I'm loading this game, I want to see only the game menu frame. I don't want to see all the other frames. How can I hide all the other frames? In a very easy way that everyone knows. I'm just giving all the other frames, display none. And in this way, when I'm loading the game, I'm only seeing the game menu frame. But now I need to create some flags that they will tell me if something is open or something is closed. How can I create flags without using any JavaScript? And if you are thinking about input HTML element of checkboxes, they are like flags. Unchecked, false. Checked, true. And this is exactly what I'm adding in the beginning of the HTML document. I'm adding 3 different checkboxes. Every one of them have different ID name, and every one of them is need to do different operation. The first checkbox, for example, that has the ID name of Toggle Game, if it's unchecked, it means that I want to see the game menu frame, but to hide the game frame. But if it's checked, this is mean that I want to see the game frame, but to hide the game menu frame, the opposite. The other 2 checkboxes are even more simple to understand. The checkbox that has the ID name of How to Play pop-up, if it's unchecked, don't show me the How to Play pop-up. If you are checked, please show me the How to Play pop-up. The same way for the third checkbox that has the ID name of OMI pop-up. If it's unchecked, show me the OMI pop-up. And if you are checked, please show me the OMI pop-up. But those are just checkboxes that I'm putting in the beginning of the HTML document with opacity of 0, position absolute, top minus something. You cannot see them and you cannot click on them. And now we need a way to trigger those checkboxes without clicking on them specific. How can I do it? To do that, I'm using a very old feature that exists from the beginning of HTML. The game navigation button that you saw are not created from button HTML element. Instead, I'm using here label HTML element that only look like buttons. And how they are triggering those checkboxes, every label can get the 4 attribute that can be connected to a specific input. For example, this save the world label button element, yes. This one is this one, and it's connected to the checkbox that has the ID name of Toggle Game. You see Toggle Game here and Toggle Game here. And if you will click this label button, it will trigger this checkbox, and it will change its status from unchecked to status of checked. If you will click it again, it will change again from checked to unchecked, and as many times that you will clicking on it. The same way for the 2 other label button. For example, if I will click on this OMI label button, this one, you see OMI, it's connected to the input that has the 4 attribute with the ID name of OMI pop-up. You see OMI pop-up here and here. You will click it once, it will change this status of this checkbox from unchecked to checked. You will click it again, it will change again from checked to unchecked. But this is just changing those statuses of those checkboxes. It still doesn't do any operation for us besides changing the statuses of those checkboxes. But now we need to use the status of this checkbox to show or hide other frames of the game. How can we do it? To do that, I'm using here two special CSS features that we have in the CSS selectors. The first feature, I can see if there is a specific checkbox with the check pseudo class. I can see if there is a specific checkbox that is in the status of checked. And only if the specific checkbox is in status of checked, I can go to any sibling element that come after with the special sibling selector and to give it display block, display none. And in this way, I can show or hide other frames in the game. And this is exactly what I'm doing in the real game. For example, when I'm clicking on the how to play label button element, it will trigger the checkbox that has the ID name of how to play pop-up, and it will change the status from unchecked to check. And this means that now this selector will start to work because this selector is working only when this checkbox is in status of checked. And if the checkbox that has the ID name of how to play pop-up is in status of checked, go to the sibling element that has the ID name of how to play. This is the real pop-up, and just give it display block. And now the pop-up is open. But now you need to ask yourself another question. How I'm closing this pop-up? And when this pop-up is open, this means that this checkbox is in status of checked. And now I just need to change the status from checked to unchecked. And to do that, the X button and the close button, again, are not button HTML element. Again, they are only look like button, but they are label HTML element that are being connected with the for attribute to the same checkbox, this checkbox. And if you will click at them, it will trigger the checkbox that was in status of checked. It will change it to unchecked. This selector will stop to work, and this will close us the pop-up because we declared the display none in the beginning. Nice. But now you need to ask yourself another question. What is happening when I'm clicking the save the wall button, the play button of the game? When I'm clicking the save the wall button, the play button of the game, I need to do two operations instead of one. First, I need to hide the game menu frame, and then I need to show the game frame itself. How can I do two operations with one checkbox? And it's really the same idea if you are thinking about it. The first checkbox that has the ID name of Toggle Game, if it's in status of checked, first go to the sibling element that has the class name of game menu frame and give it display none. This is hiding the game menu frame. And after that, go to the sibling element that has the class name of game frame and give it display block. And this is opening the game frame itself, where we are playing the game. And in this way, you can do as many operations that you want. This way of written is written with SAS. You can write it in two separate CSS selectors, but it's a lot more readable and to read it and to write it with SAS. Nice. Let's continue for one of the most amazing tricks in this game. In this game, when I'm clicking on those coronavirus creatures, they are being disappear. And the score of the game is going up. And we actually have here two different tricks that we need to talk about them. The first trick is when I'm clicking on those coronavirus creatures, they need to be disappear. And the second trick is that I need to count all those dead viruses and to print the total score to the screen. Let's start first with the first trick. If you remember in the beginning, I told you that every coronavirus creature is a label HTML element. And I also told you that it has an input type radio inside. But I also told you that all the visual part are starting here. We have this div class body, and the body is the body of the coronavirus creature, and the eyes and the hairs are inside, here inside this div element. But what I'm doing in the real game, I'm doing animation to the label HTML element that is moving around the screen. Because the label HTML element has all the visual part here, it's taking all the visual part with it. But it's also meaning that if I'm clicking on the visual part, it's like I'm clicking on the label HTML element because it's wrapped with the label HTML element. And because the input type razor is inside, it will automatically get triggered. And what does it mean? It means that I'm moving the label HTML element, that moving all the visual parts with it. I'm clicking on the visual part, it's like I'm clicking on the label HTML element. This will trigger automatically the input type radio, and it will change the status from unchecked to status of checked. This status is telling us that the virus is being dead. And now we need to hide the visual part of the virus. And to do that, I'm just select CSS counters feature. And how it really works. In order to it to work properly, it needs to be It needs to be defined before of all those coronavirus creature. And to do that, I'm just need to declare it. I'm declaring it on the body HTML element. And how are you declaring a CSS counter? You're just selecting the body HTML element in the CSS, and you are using the special property of counter reset, and you give it any name that you want. I gave it the name Corona. And now I need to count all those dead viruses. How I'm counting them? I'm selecting every input type radio that is in status of checked. Counter increment me the Corona value that I created here. And now I need to summarize and to print the total score to the screen. In order to it to work properly, I need to be defined it in the HTML after all the input type radio. The easiest place to put it is just in the bottom of the HTML document. I created here the div class sum. The text score is coming from the HTML, and after I need to print the total score. Exactly here. How I'm doing it, I'm just selecting the class of sum, using the after pseudo element, that using the content property, that using the native CSS counter function, that just printing me the Corona value that I incremented here and created here. And in this way, it's always listening and printing the total score to the screen. Because it's a very complicated example, I want to show you this in a real code example. And let's open it in the code pen. And as you can see, I kind of created 5 coronavirus creature. You can see the label. You can see the input type radio. In the real game, it's this input type radio. As you can see, in the real game, it has opacity of 0. All the visual part of the coronavirus is this div class body. This is the big black circle. And the eyes and the ears in the real game are here inside, okay? Nice. A place to summarize the total score, this is in the bottom, div class sum. The text score is coming from the HTML, but the numbers are coming from the CSS. To create a CSS counter, I selected the body HTML element, and I created the property of counter reset, and I gave it the name Corona. For every input type radio that is in status of checked, increment me the Corona value, the counter Corona value that I created on the body HTML element. Beside of it, if the input type radio in status of checked, go to the sibling element that has class of body and give it opacity of 0. You see, if this input type radio will be checked, it will go to the sibling element and it will give it opacity of 0. Okay? And to print the total score to the screen, I'm just selecting this class of sum with the after pseudo element that will come here. I'm using here the content property that using the native CSS counter function that just printing me the Corona value that we incremented here and created here. Let's see that it really works. I'm clicking on those coronavirus, they disappear. You can even see the radio button is being checked. And in this way, you are creating a pure CSS score in a pure CSS game. Nice. But let's continue to our next trick. That is another amazing trick. How can I create pure CSS countdown? Let's do and see it in the real code example. As you can see here, the numbers, this countdown is not coming from the HTML. Instead, it's coming again from the CSS. But as you can see here, I have an animation that is going only between 9 to 0. But here it's going between 99 to 0. What is happening here? We actually here, I'm doing this one integer number. It's not an integer number. It's 2 separated strings, the first value and the second value. And it's only looking like one number because it's very synchronized. That you understand exactly what you're seeing right now, let's print here the text AA, and you will see that there isn't any real connection between these both numbers. Okay? This is the before pseudo element of this element, and this is the after pseudo element. As you can see here, let's reset the animation. As you can see here, I'm selecting this class of count in the CSS. And the before pseudo element is the first value of the number. I'm calling in the animation to the animation of countdown, this animation. And I'm telling it to work 100 seconds and 1 iteration. 100 seconds and total of 10 frames, this meaning that every 10 seconds will go number down. 20 another, 30 another, 40 another, and so on and so on. And after one iteration, I want it to be stuck on the last frame of the animation. To do that, I'm just adding here the special forwards value that telling the animation when you are finished, please be stuck on the last frame of the animation. To create the second string of the number, I'm calling in the after pseudo element to the same animation of countdown, but now in a different way. Now I'm telling it to work for 10 seconds and 10 iteration. 10 seconds, 10 frames, this means that every 1 second will go number down, 2 seconds another, 3 seconds another, and so on and so on. When it will finish the first iteration, it will do it again for another 9 iteration. Why? because I told it to work for a total of 10 iterations. And after all those iterations, I want that the second value will be stuck as well on the 0 value. To do that, I'm using here the forwards value, the telling the animation, when you are finished all the iteration, please be stuck on the last frame of the animation. And it's only looking like a real countdown, but it's actually animation that I'm doing on string values in the HTML. And if you want to see that it's really stopping on the 0, 0, let's see that it really stopped. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and finish. Nice. But let's continue to more amazing things. Random values. I want to show you why I wanted to create random stuff in the real game. And let's play this game again. And as you can see here, the location of the values are really randomized. Even the scale of them is being randomized. Even the rotation of them is being randomized. And how can I create random stuff in CSS? You can, but you can do it in SAS. But before I will show you the real code example, you need to understand that if every coronavirus creature is an animation, this means that I need to create 100 different animations for every one of those viruses. And as you can guess, I didn't want to write them one by one. And you can kind of guess how I created them. Let me show you this in the real code. I created a SAS for loop that is running 100 iteration. And it's creating me this, as you can see, this is the SAS for loop, and this created me this CSS animation. Sorry, it's creating me this CSS animation 100 times. But in every one of the iteration, as you can see, every coronavirus have 6 different locations in the game. The translate X is always the same, but the translate Y, I'm using here the SAS random function that randomizes me a value between 1 to 80 and just doubling it in 1VH. Even for the scale, I'm using the random function, and even for the rotation, I'm using the SAS random function. That you won't be afraid to use it, I want to show you another example of the SAS random function, that it will be more easier to understand. Let's compile the HTML that you won't be afraid from here. Just regular HTML, 6 empty li HTML element. The numbers that you are seeing inside is not coming from the HTML, instead it's coming from the CSS. How it's created in the SAS code, I have here a SAS for loop that is running 6 iterations. In every one of the iteration, this creates me dynamically the CSS selector between class 1 to class 6. And with the before pseudo element, inside the string, I'm using here the SAS random function that randomizes me a value between 1 to 80 and I'm just doubling it in 1VH. And all those values that you're seeing inside are randomized. In order that those values to change, we just need to compile the SAS code again and again and again. And to do it, I just can press here enter, and you will see that the numbers are being changed every time that I'm compiling the SAS code. And that you will understand exactly what's happening here, because browsers are not reading SAS code. Let's see the compiled CSS. Just regular CSS. In order to those values to change, you need to compile the SAS code to CSS again and again and again. Okay? Nice. Let's continue to our next trick. Okay. In the end of the game, after 99 seconds, I want to put the game over curtain, and I want to create the effect that the player can play this game again and again and again. But I had a problem. I understand that I need to reset all the checkboxes that was checked to unchecked. And to reset the CSS score, I needed to reset all the radio button that was in status of check to unchecked. How can I do it? Do the back to main menu button, it's not a button, and it's not in this case label HTML element. In this case, I use it here, an input type reset. And this special input, in order to it to work, I only needed to wrap all the project with the form HTML element. And when I'm clicking on this input type reset button, it will automatically reset me all the input on the forms. It means that all the checkbox says that was unchecked will be unchecked. All the radio button that was checked that create me the pure CSS score will be unchecked, and this will reset the score to 0. And the last question that you need to ask yourself, how can I know exactly when to put this game over curtain? I need to put it exactly after 99 seconds. And this is one of the most easiest tricks that I have in this game. The only thing that I needed to do, everyone knows that animation can get animation duration. Animation to the end. But what you are forgetting, that there is another animation duration, that the animation delay duration. This is telling the animation after how much time you need to be start. And in the real game, it's have something like 99 seconds. For this example, I only put here 5 seconds. And let's refresh the screen and we will count together between 1 to 5, and you will see that it really works, okay? I'm refreshing the screen and let's count together. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we saw here a lot of CSS tricks that with them you can create pure CSS games. Stock, but it isn't. What I want you to take from this talk is to create your own fun project. Only for fun, not for your job, not for to making money, not for your friends, only for yourself and only for fun. And why it's so important? Because this is the best way for our brain to learn new stuff. Think about it. In the animal kingdom, small kittens are like hunting each other, and in this way they are knowing how to hunt when they are bigger. And we as adults, we're starting to learn things in the hard way, in the boring way. Instead of doing fun, to create your own project for fun, in the way you are learning to do a lot more new stuff in code, in the way you will be a better web developer. If you're a better web developer, in the end, you will get a better salary. And even this is not important, because the most important thing in life is to have fun. Create your any project that you want. CSS, JavaScript, anything in web development. And in this way, before we finish, my friend, I'm Elad Shechter. I'm a CSS HTML architect. I'm doing a lot of stuff on CSS thing. The best way to find me is in my Twitter account. You can see a lot of other articles in Medium, CodePens, other projects in GitHub. Everything is in my own website. If you want to see all the example code in my, you can QR the slides with your smartphone and to see the slide and to use all the links that you saw in this talk. And thank you very much for listening.